Welcome back to another episode of Clinic Success Secrets, where we uncover the strategies and insights that drive clinic growth and excellence in patient care. Join us as we dive deep into expert advice and success stories from healthcare professionals and leaders all around the globe. Today, we have a return guest. We have the great honor of having the one and only Boomer Anderson back on the show. Boomer is the CEO of Smarter Not Harder Inc. and one of the innovative minds behind Troscriptions. He also leads the Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, a nonprofit dedicated to educating healthcare professionals in optimizing health rather than merely treating disease. This is the second episode that we've done together, and I really enjoyed the first one. And as a result of how, well the first conversation went, today is going to be a bit more of a free flow. There's so many topics that we can dive deep into, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing how this goes. So with that being said, Boomer, it's a pleasure as always.
Thomas, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our last conversation, as I said, and I think it was at one point we had to stop it because we could have gone down many wormholes, tunnels, whatever the cool kids are. I don't even know what that worm is from Dune. Anyway, but it's we could have done some sandworm moves, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, no, you and me both. Just before we started recording there, we were talking about, and this is even not necessarily on the clinic side of things, but I think it mirrors very importantly the work that you're doing. We're talking about stress, entrepreneurial journey, sleep, lack thereof, practicing what we preach, and I think that's an interesting place to start. And for anyone thinking, hey, that may not necessarily be relevant to clinic owners, you clearly haven't talked to medical professionals, because I don't know anyone that's well rested. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on augmenting that, as you mentioned, and obviously you do a lot of work with focusing on GABA receptors and so on, and I think there's an interesting parallel there. So yeah, I'd love to dive deep on your thoughts on all of that.
Let's get right into it on sleep, work-life integration, how to sort of practice what you preach as an entrepreneur or practitioner, and also at the same time recognizing that there are items, landmines, wormholes, sandworms that sometimes you need to surf, right? And or you even have children, for example. And so the practicalities of getting 100% recovery score every day are usually either made up by some influencer or something that is a great goal, but you have to kind of accept the fact that there are going to be times in life where 100% is not possible. So let's get into one of my personal passions, and a lot of the work I do on the consulting and practitioner side is around entrepreneurial health or entrepreneur health. And the reason why I'm passionate about it is because I guess you could label me as one of those people. And if you think about the job of an entrepreneur, and by entrepreneur, I mean like a business owner, and it has become such a sexy term over the past couple of years, like, especially when I left finance in 2016, this was the golden age of blitzscaling, right? And you started to see companies like Airbnb, Uber, Facebook, etc., scale to magnificent heights very, very quickly. And I think a lot of what the media did at that time, and still does, is sensationalizes these success stories. But let's spend a little bit of time on just entrepreneurship in general, and then I'm going to get into the health aspect of it. So the 5-year survival rate of a startup is about 50%. And usually out of that 50%, some of them are just struggling to get by. There are very few unicorns in the world. In fact, that's the reason why they're called a unicorn. So the reality of this is that you hear about, Elon, Travis Kalanick, Mark Zuckerberg, all of these people who have done incredible things, and they deserve a lot of credit. Payal Kadika, there's a few others, right? And they deserve a ton of credit because they executed incredibly well. They also got very, very lucky. They were in the right spot. They're there at the right time, low interest rate environments, general interest in the technologies that they're producing, et cetera. So I think there's a general thing among entrepreneurs, business owners, practitioners that needs to be addressed here, and that's around physical and mental health. And so I spend a lot of time in that consulting practice. I only work with entrepreneurs because I recognize that not everybody is going to be a Mark Zuckerberg, right? And even if you are, I bet we don't see there's that trite picture of the glacier where 80% of it is below the surface. Those people have incredibly good publicists. And so there's an acknowledgement that needs to be made around entrepreneurial health. And I think one of the ways or the vector that we can go into here about health, relaxation, stress, balance, or lack thereof can come through what's called chronobiology. And we teach this in the nonprofit, but chronobiology is the study of biological rhythms. Most people listening to this have heard of the circadian rhythm, right? So, the sleep-wake cycle, and most humans are diurnal. I focus on chronobiology a lot with entrepreneurs because if you can get that right, and I'm not saying get 100% recovery score on your Whoop or your Oura Ring every night. I boast on because I'm that guy. Yeah. But and I'm not saying get 100% recovery score, but if you can get that right, if you can dial in some basic routines, the discipline of those routines actually goes to reinforce you as a business person too. But I think for those listening who say like, well, hey, I don't have time to sleep because my to-do list is forever long. The truth is that the to-do list is never going to get shorter. It's always going to have more things on it. There's always going to be, because you are a competitive entrepreneur with a certain level of drive, you're always going to have more things to do. And so there has to be a general acceptance that, you get what you get done during the day and then you turn it off, come back to it again. And in the case of entrepreneurs, maybe you do that on the weekend too. And that's okay. I don't really want to chastise people for working on the weekend or even working 12-hour days because frankly, I would be hypocritical. But there is a discussion that needs to be had about the switching off and that benefit to performance. This is why I started with chronobiology, right? And so chronobiology study biological rhythms. We recap the circadian rhythm. But there's many other rhythms that exist in our body. Testosterone runs on a rhythm. Growth hormone pulses on a rhythm. Cortisol runs on an almost logarithmic rhythm throughout the day. And by making sure that we get some base anchoring routines, right, we can actually get our body to run more efficiently. That equates to higher levels of performance. But because people like to be sold on what's negative first, let's talk about what the negatives are if you get that wrong. And I have firsthand experience with this. So if you disrupt your biological rhythms on a consistent basis, which I did when I used to travel all over the world, I did 40 countries in 4 years. I was never in the same time zone for more than 3 days. And so disruptions like that can lead to adverse events like cardiovascular disease, advanced aging, cancer, insomnia, anxiety, depression, all kinds of things, right? So when you're looking at your chronobiology, getting some basic sleep routines in place will be absolutely important. Let me kind of also reiterate with a study why this is important. So there was this awesome study, and I can't remember who the authors were, but there's an awesome study that compared sleep deprivation with drinking beer and they looked at brain waves in the study.
Yeah.
And there's this, if you have 2 hours of sleep deprivation, meaning you get about 6 hours of sleep at night, it's the equivalent of drinking 2 to 4 12-ounce beers, which for those of us, if you're in Ireland, that's like a real beer. If you're in Europe, it's like 2 of the continental pints.
Yeah.
And so
Proper pint.
maybe even 3. So it's you have already some cognitive impairment there. But if you go and perform an all-nighter, which in this space, there's a lot of people that do that, it's the equivalent of drinking, I believe, 10 to 12 to 14 ounce beers, which, even in my prime, when I was, fraternity guy in college, that was incredibly difficult for me to do and still not slur my speech, right? So the question is like, why the hell would you do this if your objective is to get out there and perform every day, if your objective is to get out there and live your truth or, represent what you, or practice what you preach, right? The off switch leads to a multiplier effect of the on switch. The first place I always start with people is evening routines. Dr. Ted, our founder, has something called the sleep anchoring technique. And what he encourages all of his clients to do is to start their day with when they go to sleep, because that ultimately shows what a priority sleep is for you. So rather than saying I start my day at 6 a.m., start your day at 10 p.m. And you go to sleep at 10 p.m., you get your 8 hours or 7. I usually try to encourage the entrepreneur crowd, wherever they are, just improve by 15 minutes. And we can do it like 15 minutes, 30 minutes a quarter. And that's great. But, that 7-hour limit usually helps people quite significantly, right? And so sleep anchoring technique there. So you really have an evening routine set up. What gets you into that cadence by which you fall asleep at your designated time? Then you have a morning routine. And this is where looking at light really, really helps people. And for those of us who live in cities, light isn't always possible. There's a hell of a lot of tools out there, things like Spurti. There's the Lumi daylight lamps. I used to have, when I lived in Amsterdam, was having to deal with European winters. I would sit there with a daylight lamp on most of the day. And you can control a lot of or manipulate your circadian rhythm, certainly, with light. And so there's a lot to do just around the routine side before we even get into the things that we do at Troscriptions around augmenting GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, the primary relaxing neurotransmitter. So the behaviors certainly need to happen. But in the meantime, you might need some help just relaxing and finding that off switch altogether, which is where molecules come in. So I'll pause there because I already went on a lot about chronobiology there, and we can
know that there's, again, as with the first call, there's any amount of things that I can relate to there. And I'm guilty. I had this conversation, if I was to open up my own woof, and I'm outing myself here. But I think my sleep performance, on my end is, and this is not 40%, 50%, 183%, 56, 41, 42, and 50 for the past 7 days, effectively. And like that, I think, again, practicing what I preach here, but the fact, what you're saying is that ultimately the to-do list, it's a moving goalpost. No matter what you get done there, it's not as if you're going to finally get to a point where you're like, right, I've done every single thing that I need to do. So accepting that as a given, why not doing your work sober? Seems like a bit of a rational thing to want to do. A few questions in terms of the morning routine and evening routine. I feel like we're going to get very Andrew Huberman-esque on this, but
it's okay.
No, as in that, I love it. The evening routine. Okay, so number one, 2 questions for you is, what does your personal evening routine look like? And number 2, and what are your thoughts, morning, right? So you talk about hormones fluctuating in the day. Ideally, do you recommend something to spike cortisol and testosterone in the morning, like cold exposure? to kind of kickstart that? And also, are there particular wavelengths of light that you do recommend in the event that you're in a city or say Ireland or Canada where there may not be that natural bit of daylight? So could we go into more information about what your evening routine is like and a reasonable morning routine that anybody can implement with a busy schedule?
Sure. So I always like to explain the reason why, because there's strategies, tactics, and tools, right? And I'm a big fan of strategy, and then the tactics and tools ultimately solve for themselves, right? And so let's talk about the reason why before I get into the objective strategies, tactics. And well, the objective is to sleep better and to be more healthy, but the strategies around that, the evening routine. So this also applies for morning routines. Why is Andrew Huberman, or Choose Your Influencer, who is really knowledgeable, the ones that are really knowledgeable, so focused on light? Well, light is what's called a Zeitgeber, and it's a cue to our bodies as to how to operate. I earlier came into this conversation with a discussion around chronobiology and biological rhythms. So many of those rhythms are just synced by light. And there's a foundational concept that we have in health optimization medicine practice called the holobiont. And the holobiont, and I did a TED talk on this, is a concept from biology. And it's stating that you're not really a superorganism, meaning you're not really this human superorganism. You're actually a collection of many other organisms. If you think about that, it kind of makes sense intuitively. You have bacteria in your gut microbiome. You have fungus in your gut microbiome. You have a series of viruses. You're actually made up of cells who were really a marriage between the mitochondria and an ancient cellular form, right? And so you're actually a collection of organisms. And one of our principles is how do we optimize that collection of organisms? One of the ways to do that from a biological rhythms perspective is by activating these Zeitgebers, of which light and food are big ones. So let's use that as the basic principle by which we go into the evening routine. If you're a practitioner or a business owner, there's a transition time that needs to happen. And so the routine for me is inducing that transition. Now, there's different ways to do this, but you need a signal to your body that like, hey, work is done. So sympathetic state, fight or flight, we can calm that down. And you're transitioning into your evening where it's either more parasympathetic, so rest and digest. In the case of food, there might be a case here for not eating too late, but I'll get to that here in a second. But also just that ability to switch off. So what are some good cues and transitions to go into the evening? I've generally found that dinner with most people is not the best transition. The reason is most business owners. The reason is because most business owners eat dinner and then they pick up their email and they start going to work again, right? And so you need a second transition, actually. And, for some people, it's a tea, something that can relax you. There's different teas that work really well. Valerian root tends to be sleep promoting or sleep promoting. And chamomile, there's some aspects of passion flower extract, apigenins become very popular lately that are very sleep promoting, right? And rest promoting. So a tea might be that transition for you. What I'm looking for here is a replacement for alcohol, because for a lot of people, it's you're from Ireland, so it's like, give me the Jameson, double Jameson on the rocks, right? Or if you're really crazy, just neat. But you want something that is a cue for you to go into your evening. Then it becomes a lot about manipulating light. The cool kids wear a lot of blue light blockers. I don't have them on right now. But you know what those look like, right? Orange or yellow shades that block out certain instances of blue light. But you can also do this by simply having something like Philips Hue and have a time of day whereby which your light changes, right? And you have them right there. There are certain types of light bulbs that are better than others. Incandescent, even though they burn out, tends to represent sunlight a little bit better. But towards the evening, transitioning your light. Food itself can be a cue to wake up. It also can be a cue to help you sleep better. And so generally speaking, when it comes to food, I try to have dinner 2 to 3 hours before going to bed and nothing else. And the reason is that I don't want to go to bed on a full stomach. That will trash your deep sleep. It won't trash it as much as alcohol will, but it will affect your deep sleep greatly. We need deep sleep because, well, frankly, if it's the one that you completely wreck, can be fatal for people. But sleep architecture overall is important, meaning that you have a series of 90-minute rhythms throughout the night. You can go through particular sleep cycles, but deep sleep also helps with hormone promotion. I believe REM is where dreams happen, memory consolidation, etc. So you have your cue to rest. You switch your lights. You make sure that whatever you're taking in at night actually helps relax you. So I'll admit it, like sometimes I watch Netflix and I watch some ridiculously what I call mind-numbing TV shows. These are things that allow me to switch my brain off. Sometimes I need that, right? And you take 30 minutes and you watch something, what is it? Like, what's the one? The Perfect Match or something like that, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's kind of a silly show, but you watch it and it allows you to kind of put, whatever's going on in the Excel spreadsheet over there to rest. So you have that sort of that evening routine. And ideally, you'd want to go to bed around the same time every single night, plus minus 30 minutes. Now, for an entrepreneur, that doesn't always happen, but you're going to want to get some sort of sleep promoting stack too. We can get into that a little bit, but let's focus on the routines for now. Then there's sort of the morning routine. And again, starting with the strategy and the why. If you own a business, there's always a fire to put out. There's never a day where something is not on fire. And even if there is like a minor fire, it can be a distraction. It can cause cortisol spikes. So you asked a question earlier about ice baths. And I think that's become very, very popular. And, there's a lot of good work done around the dopamine that comes with that. There's some decent work around, it's more anecdotal, around the resilience built and how it's really a good stressor and encourages people to do hard things in a society where we really don't have to do that many hard things. But the question I always ask is why and what does the data support? So when I'm working with a client, I have metabolomics data on them, advanced metabolomics data on them that tells me exactly all aspects of their Krebs cycle, how they produce energy, and where they might need help with it. I also have hormone level data, so cortisol. And so the issue with spiking somebody's cortisol is that if their cortisol is already spiked too often, you're actually perpetuating a cycle. And so you can actually induce severe stress in people who have already too many cortisol spikes. So I'm not a fan of saying everybody ice bath, but there are some reasons for it. It also depends on your ancestral history quite a bit because there's a lot of people, for instance, from Southeast Asia, natives to Southeast Asia or South Asia, that their mitochondria don't support what happened, the benefit, or don't give you the benefits from cold plunges. So here, it's always the question of what does the data tell me? And so if you're not doing ice baths, what do we know that works? Well, going out and getting light. Huberman always tells people to go out and look at the sun for a couple of minutes every morning. I think he says something like 30. A lot of times that's not practical for people. So you can use some of these modern day tools, ideally with a broad spectrum of light similar to sunlight, to help you wake up. I mentioned earlier, there's many sort of daylight companies out there. I'm not endorsing any one of them. I also, in the winter, have a Spurti, which is a lamp that is approved by the FDA to help promote vitamin D. You need UVB for that. that's not for everyone, right? And certainly if you stand in front of the Sparky for too long, you're going to burn the shit out of yourself. But the principle is basically around those zeitgebers. How do we sync your circadian rhythms? You can also get in the work of Jack Kruse and really, really, really go down a lot of wormholes here around light. And so after light, it's how do I set my mind in a way that is actually helpful for me to tackle my day? And so this is where you kind of look at what's the downside to not setting your mind. Well, do I want to fight with people all day long? Do I want to argue with whoever just emailed me, letting me know that the system is broken? Or do I want to take it, pause, observe what I may say, and then put something out to that person that is constructive so that it doesn't happen again, rather than fighting? And so a lot of my morning and a lot of what I encourage my clients to do is to embrace either a slower morning start. So that could be as little as 15, 20 minutes, or something like myself where it's an hour. And that involves meditation, that involves reading. And the reason for that is because we all live with a freaking computer in our pocket, right? And this thing, you actually heard it buzz earlier because I was a bad kid and didn't put it in airplane mode before we started. But this thing is meant to distract you. It can provide a lot of leverage, particularly around business, but it's meant to distract you. If you get notifications, probably want to turn them off. And in most cases, I only have certain people that I get notifications from, but you also want to protect yourself from being sucked down a wormhole. Now, why do you want to protect yourself? Because you're a business person with a never ending to-do list and you need to know what your priorities are, right? And this is a method for people to tell you what their priorities are, not yours. And so there's usually, like with my most successful clients, when I say most successful, I mean out there in their careers, they have to, and also the ones that seem to integrate their health into their careers very well. They have that period in the morning where they have some sort of routine. We usually work on light. We usually work on promoting relaxation in the morning, trying to get that parasympathetic state with something like meditation. We usually try to include exercise because oftentimes for this crowd, if you don't get it in the morning, you're not going to get it at all. Exercise is one of those things that, whenever you can get it, go and get it. It's generally better at least 3 hours before you're going to sleep. But for certain people, the mornings are the best time for that. And then there's sort of a promotion around focusing on learning, which for me is my favorite thing to do, right? If I don't have my 30 to 60 minutes a day learning something new, I'm going to go bonkers because the moment I open up my phone, I have a bunch of people announcing to the world what their priorities are for me. And so before I even open that, the last thing that I do is I write a list of what my top things are to do during that day. The best book on this, and it's one of those things where it's worth reading, but you can get a lot just from the title. It's called The One Thing by Gary Keller. I mentioned it last time on this podcast, but if you want to really achieve a lot and to really bring home the bacon, so to speak, and I know you're in Indonesia, so if you're not a pork bacon person, get beef bacon. But it's one of those things that you need to isolate what is the domino that you're going to push, and it's going to make everything else easier. And that starts with prioritization. And the only way you can do that is getting quiet time because nobody else is going to give it to you. So I think when it comes to entrepreneurial health, the funny thing is that nobody's going to do it if you don't do it yourself. And sometimes that requires hiring a practitioner, a coach, to help you along that route and to show you sort of the things that have worked in the past for other people. But oftentimes you have to stand up, raise your hand and say like, hey, I need help. Or, hey, I'm going to do this for me. And there's a secret multiplier effect that isn't talked about. We talked about it earlier when it comes to productivity and sleep, but it's something that giving yourself that space, allowing yourself to embrace that off switch, to have those slow mornings, it really creates leverage throughout your day.
there's so many angles I want to go with this, and you finish it up actually on exactly the point that came to mind. Number one, every single sentence, I swear, since we started talking, I've resonated with it much more than I'd like to admit. But the point about your phone effectively being a device that enables people to try and input their priorities and slide them in front of yours. Like, I can tell you right now, the reason why my Whoop score has been so low is performance has been so low is I wake up in the morning, check Slack, cortisol spike, immediately reactive, jump straight to work. Could be on 4 hours sleep. So number one, I think, and again, this is a different angle to what we often take about, but this is assuming any healthcare entrepreneur or any entrepreneur in general is listening to this, they will know exactly what we're talking about here, where without the defined work hours. I think the point that you're making it is we're kind of getting nearly sort of the whole wishy-washy side of things here, but I don't really think it is. But abundance mindset and all that kind of thing. I think you're hinting at something, and maybe I'd love to hear your scientific argument for this. The power of starting your day in a parasympathetic state is, as you said, incredibly underrated. I think the modern day, and I can say this from my space, my own social media algorithm, as with a lot of people for the longest time, especially in the past, recently, it's hustle culture. Alex Hormozy-esque, like, if you're not work optimizing every single hour of your day, you're doing something wrong. The issue, I think, with this is, as you said, you're constantly in a sympathetic state. I remember literally, thinking, I don't know the last time I wasn't in fight or flight. Constantly reactive. Your tolerance to stress is so much lower. Because again, I know you can dive deep into this. I just want to share my thoughts. Where I always felt my capacity for stress is always 80% out of baseline. So something that might only be 50% pushes you over. You're hyper reactive and you can't make those decisions. Conversely, it's not a coincidence where I think any day time I'd meditate, when I was younger, I loved Harry Potter. What I always said was, it's like, I'm not sure if you know the good luck potion that they have, where's everything.
No, I was told about Harry Potter that if I was to get the sorting hat, that I would be a member of Slytherin. But I will, I actually ran a social experiment about that at one point. But I'll kind of leave it at that. We can go into Harry Potter.
It's a separate conversation. It's a separate conversation on here. But point being is, there's this scene where, it's really it's that whole saying, whether you think you can or you can't, you're probably right. There's a placebo effect where one of them thinks he's taking this good luck potion and everything works out. And, anytime I start, I'd set the time aside to be in that parasympathetic state, pause, watch my thoughts, be the observer of your thoughts. Everything just works out. You get the double-edged sword of, you're actually enjoying your life, you're present, and things work out well. I suppose, do you have any thoughts on the science behind that? Because, again, you'll hear people talk about abundance and all these sorts of things. I don't, and then you hear other people, especially recently, there's a famous quote, Matt, this is something I just want to hear your thoughts on. There's a famous quote by Alex Hormozy, big person in the business space, for anyone that doesn't know. And it said, confidence doesn't come from shouting affirmations in the mirror. It comes from building a stack of undeniable evidence that you can use. However, I don't necessarily think it's binary. And this might seem irrelevant to clinic success perhaps, but I don't think it is. If you don't believe there's a chance for you to succeed in the first place because you're hyper-reactive, no amount of volume is going to compensate for that. So if anybody here is trying to make new business relationships or anything like that, much like, I don't know, making any kind of relationship work in life, dating, platonic, improving anything. If you're going in fundamentally thinking that things won't work because you're so full of fear, volume is not going to negate that. and you're going to get into this negative feedback loop. And I think that is a really, really important aspect that people don't talk about when it comes to the importance of increasing your leverage through starting the day in a parasympathetic state. I suppose I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts on that, because it's definitely something that's been playing on my mind recently. Take the time, relax, and be properly off, so when you're on, you're actually on.
Yeah, it's interesting because you brought up Alex Hormozy, and one thing that I think often gets overlooked with Alex is when he talks about health, he does talk about his sleep every once in a while. And he does say, I will sleep as late as I can. And then, I mean, what he does after that is he jacks himself up with caffeine and nicotine, right? And that's totally cool, right? But he oftentimes, and the reason why he does this is because the algorithm tells him to keep doing it. Like, he's promoting routines, discipline, etc. If you read through a lot of what he says, a lot of it is, frankly, discipline. So let's unpack a little bit of what you said there about parasympathetic state and starting a day in the parasympathetic state, because I think just biologically, it's not hard to do, but if you think about when you wake up, there's something called the cortisol awakening response, which you can measure, and your cortisol increases quite significantly as you wake up. So the question is, all right, how do we leverage that to keep you more in a state of presence? And so what I would advocate more in terms of lexicon in this case, rather than using the state of parasympathetic, it's more of a state of presence. And, you kind of look at what are the tools available to you to be present. And let me pan out 35,000 feet or 10,000 meters here for a second and just kind of say, why the hell would we care about presence? So at the end of your life, you're probably, sitting there in bed, and most of the people that I've talked to who have had this experience or talked to people with this experience, they don't necessarily recant stories of, I did this deal, I did that deal, or whatever, because frankly, when you're in the middle of the deal, you probably weren't paying attention to much. You probably weren't aware of much, right? You recant the moments that you're present for. And this might not be shared by everybody, but for me, the objective is how do I remain present even in those moments? I can tell you as a person who did many, billions of dollars of deals in South Asia over the course of 4 years, I can count on one hand the amount of times where I was like, hey, I'm present in this moment right now. And so how do you produce presence, which may have that balance, that in-between state between parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system? We at our holding company, Smarter Not Harder, promote something called dynamic equanimity, which essentially is that in-between state. What that means is that in a moment's notice, you can go out and do whatever you want to do, whether that's fight the person who's trying to, take your client or whatever, or you have to argue with a client because you really need them to take this sleep supplement in order to get to sleep. But the ability to switch back, the ability to come back to that present moment is the equanimity, right? And so equanimity is that dynamic balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic states. So whether I start in a sympathetic or parasympathetic state, frankly, you can get all of your HRV monitors. You can determine that in the morning. There used to be a company, I think they still are around, Elite HRV has now become Spren, who would allow you to determine this. And yeah, I love those gadgets and everything. But the thing for me is, what are the tactics? And now we're getting back into, my strategies, tactics, and tools, right? What are the tactics that allow me to remain present? One of the ones that usually does is meditation, right? And there's a decent amount of, the science is more around inflammation and stress reduction, etc., around 20 minutes in theory twice a day. But any meditation you can do. Meditation can also be just walking and focusing on the fact that your foot is touching the ground, right? Like right now, my foot's pressing on the ground. I'm talking to my friend here, Thomas, and we're just talking in this moment, right? And if you wanted to get metaphorical about it, there's nothing but this moment. The past is occurring right now in this moment. The future is occurring right now in this moment. So again, strategies, tactics that get us into that present moment state. Meditation for certain people that have a more negative perception of the world. Gratitude journals can certainly help in the sense that they promote a shift in frame of reference. So when I'm looking at how to start the day, I'm looking for that dynamic balance. Yin and yang is the foundation of the universe. In the middle of that is Wu Wei, which is effortless flow. That's everything that you're really striving for. So for me, you can throw the nervous system terms out with the bathwater. You can also measure those too, and look at, where's that dynamic state that I want to live in? For me, that's equanimity.
Okay. I'm trying to expose with that, right? So you're talking about I suppose the question that's coming to mind for me is we're talking about starting the day, being present, the ability to start off with this in layman's terms on the right foot. And I was for fear of just drastically oversimplifying that. Is there, I suppose, in your end, right? So with the work that you do, is it as simple as just, okay, that's the moment taken care of? Do you consciously try and draw yourself back into that state regularly throughout the day? Or is that, do you sort of compartmentalize these different states? You say, right, morning is presence, equanimity, just gratitude, all that, and then whatever happens with the day happens? Or is this something you try to catch yourself at regular intervals? Like, okay, right, boomer, it's 1 p.m, you have a break, you get coffee, draw yourself back to the present. How does that look?
Well, with anybody, you're starting at a certain point, right? And for a lot of us, one of sort of today's great teachers of this is Sam Harris, right? And he's a fairly controversial figure because he does speak his mind quite a bit, and that oftentimes scares people. But the idea of being present to your life, I think, is one that we can all agree that we want to have, right? You have your children, you have your business, you have your employees, you have your clients, and those interactions oftentimes might bring joy to you, but you want to recognize that joy in the moment, or you want to recognize that feeling in the moment. It's about being right there. And so to answer your question, this dynamic state is dynamic. You want to come back to it, right? And so as I'm going throughout the day, and I've gotten a lot better at this over time, there's transition moments, there's pauses, there's deliberate manipulations of how I speak, for instance, that allow me to come back to this moment and realize that the only thing that's happening right now is this conversation. The to-do list that I have after this it could be in my head, but it's not relevant for right now. So it is a dynamic state. And again, I know we're kind of vacillating between science here and what has been broadly labeled Buddhism, but it's more, I guess, spirituality. The idea of presence in transition moments is a great way to bring this into your life. So let's say you're going to open the door, feeling your hand opening that door. Let's say you're going to talk to a client, or I'm going to type on my client notes on my computer, feeling those fingers on the keyboard helps bring you to those present moments. And I'm almost certain that over time, you probably track that through data, and looking at something like heart rate variability to see improvements in the nervous system. Let's also go back to what you talked about earlier on the abundance mindset or growth mindset, as Carol Dweck would say, right? It's trainable, and it's something that there's also, nonviolent communication, MBSR, a lot of this stuff, right?
Okay.
A lot of these things are trainable. And I think it's worth saying, when you're born, you have a certain set of circumstances. You have a certain set of programming that has been imprinted on you based on your genetics, based on your social cultural programming, based on your bioevolutionary programming. And over time, becoming more aware of those programs does help in developing, certain frames of mind. There is a tactical advantage to creating the mindset where everything is possible through things like either, gratitude journaling. This can even happen in certain ways of framing your to-do list. There's also, tactics that, like meditation, for example, can be happy or help you with this. I tend to avoid the whole power of positive thinking movement, but that's just a personal thing. There's a tactical advantage there. And the reason for that is because as a practitioner, as a business owner, and let's go back to what I said at the beginning of this, the 5-year survival rate of a startup is roughly 50%. The odds are stacked against you from the beginning. And so making sure that you have a mindset that allows you to focus on the positive, the things that are going right, but also, and this is where I disagree with some of that positive thinking movement, but also not throwing out the negative. That can certainly help, because when we're in this consistent battle as an entrepreneur to get something into the world that wasn't before and to convince people that they need it, you're going to face a lot of rejection. And that doesn't matter if you're a practitioner and you're facing a client who says like, hey, you can see based on their lipid peroxide levels that they need a shitload of vitamin C, but they won't take it because, they want to drink Coca-Cola all day long. You're going to face rejection all the time, but focusing on those small wins and really acknowledging those small wins helps keep you going, because a lot of this game is about
rational optimism.
Yeah, rational optimism, but also a lot of this game is resilience, right? A lot of what Hormozi or some of those guys preach, it's not just hustle culture, but it's discipline, right? And so just keep going. And one of the ways to keep going is to sit down every morning. And if you have a negative bent in this world, like I do, I tend to focus on the things that are going wrong, to write down, okay, here's a few things that are going right? And here are a few projects that are going right that I'm going to push forward. And I also have to deal with these sort of quote unquote problems, if you will, but I am not alone in that. There's not a single entrepreneur on the planet who hasn't had problems. Mark Zuckerberg, Travis Kalanick, all those guys who scaled these businesses to huge lengths, they all have issues. There's been a lot that's come out about Elon this week. There's this general misnomer that because these people have been so lucky that they must be completely different. We all go through the same stuff, and a simple acknowledgement of that and a simple refocusing on, here's a couple things that are going well, as well as dealing with the issues, can be useful.
I think an important concept that's come to mind as you're talking about the importance of building resilience, and just in general with the whole entrepreneurial journey, especially when you talked about the 5-year survival rate, is sort of the concept of the infinite game, and how that ties into this.
Yeah, Simon Sinek is such a good speaker, right?
Ridiculous.
It's funny to me because, like, if you master the art of communication, especially in the rules of this world, you can present what are relatively simple concepts to people, and they get them like that, right? and or can present also abstract concepts to people. And this is one of the things that Apple did so well, is that they spent all this time simplifying. Thoreau always said simplify, right? And if you are quite the orator, as in Simon Sinek is, like you can end up being able to articulate very good concepts or concepts for people very easily. But yeah, Infinite Game, I haven't actually read the book. I get the concept, but it's, Simon's a quite a good storyteller.
Yeah. So I'm wondering which one of us is going to try and explain the concept of the Infinite Game for anyone that,
you can go for it.
Okay. I'll do my best. So the fundamental concept, as I understand it, for anyone listening that may be thinking it's a bit abstract, just hear us out in this and you see how this ties to resilience, and by extension, the importance of getting your foundations in place as an entrepreneur. The fundamental concept of the Infinite Game is that in life, basically, it's broken into multiple games, so to speak, different challenges, which are basically finite games or infinite games. Finite games are games where all the participants are known, a known end date and known rules by at least one of the people of the group. Common example of this is sports. Say if you're playing football or soccer or wherever you're from, both teams know, okay, if I score X amount of goals within a certain time period, we know who the winner is. However, an infinite game is where there are unknown players, or there's unknown time frame and unknown rules. And again, we'll give an example of this, but a lot of the challenges in life come from trying to add finite game rules to things that are actually infinite games. So, for example, being fitness. You try and get this 90-day six-pack challenge, and at the end of the day, no one actually cares if you were in good shape for 3 months of your life. The goal is to stay in shape. The goal is to keep playing. You win if you keep playing. People talk about relationships or marriage. You don't win marriage, you just keep playing it. You stay married. And the fundamental concept of how this has business is, at the end of the day, much like a to-do list where it's never ending and it's a starting goalpost, you don't win business by having a certain revenue goal. You win business by embracing the challenge of the game and keeping playing. And you can't have that without resilience. You win if you keep playing. You can't lose if you don't stop.
Let me guru this a little bit, because I know that some of the things that I've said today may or may not resonate with people. For me, equanimity is that moment by moment awareness, right? And to guru this, the journey is the destination. Again, it's so trite, and I really, really try to abandon the personal development world, but it does help if you can get yourself in that frame of mind that what you're doing right now is the destination. And now it's very hard in a Western society in particular in order to do that, because we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, especially now that we have phones and social media and have to do search engine optimization, which I know you know a lot about. It's you're constantly comparing yourself to others. But at the end of the day, infinite games are about the journey as the destination. It's funny because when you were saying that, I was looking over at my bookshelf, and like I have a background in economics, and like John von Neumann's book on game theory is there, right? And so it's a little different. And Simon Sinek essentially takes finite games, which is game theory, and puts it into his oh so articulate words, whereas John von Neumann will probably make most people drink 2 liters of coffee before the first 10 pages, right? So it's different strokes for different folks. I tend to like to go back to old books and read them, but some people like the newer age stuff, and frankly, it's whatever works for you, right? Like if you can get the concept that helps you, if it comes from Simon Sinek, that's great. If you can get it from this podcast, fantastic.
Yeah. No, on that parallel, we'll dive back into the actual medical side of things. Now I'm much.
Let's get back into health. This whole conversation, by the way, is about health. It's not,
again,
everything is related.
As you said, it's important to know the why. It's easy to say, I don't have the luxury of sleep. It's like this. There's concrete arguments as to how this would benefit resilience, and there's a very practical, rational reason as to why that's a non-negotiable if you want to keep playing, because you need to keep playing in order to win. Okay, so you talked about one thing you mentioned earlier on was stacks, health stacks before sleep. What are you advocates of? I mean, L-theanine, magnesium, much more nuanced things like that.
So let's go through principles here first, just to sort of understand again, where I'm coming from, because I think there's especially with entrepreneurs and practitioner owners, there's an ongoing monitoring is needed, right? Like somebody needs to take care of you, the practitioner, because you're going out and seeing patients and clients all the time. And so let's start with just sort of what those benchmarks are. And then I'm going to go down into, again, those tools, some of those things that can help with relaxation, promoting relaxation. So at the end of the day, you want to optimize. Let's say you're an entrepreneur and you're a practitioner, a business owner, and you want to live your truth. You want to practice what you preach, right? And so for me, that looks a lot like benchmarking. Now, I have a background in investment banking, and so benchmarking is one of my favorite things. In investment banking, you do it with spreadsheets, and you compare a company to another company in the same sector, yada, yada, yada. But with health, you can benchmark using biomarkers. And I tend to do a lot of preventative testing. I spend a lot of money on that every year. But a basic framework for me or for my clients starts with metabolomics. And so metabolomics measures cellular level health, where you are now and where you have been recently. You're able to see there precisely what supplements you need to optimize for energy, which frankly, if most people get more energy, they're probably happy people, right? And so I'll run those tests every 6 to 12 months. That will give me a framework for supplementing. That way I don't have to listen to all the influencers in the world that tell me, hey, you need to take, I remember back in the day when I first got into this, by the way, I was very, very guilty of hearing, and I have nothing against Tim Ferriss, I have nothing against any of these influencers, other than the fact that they're freaking charismatic, right? And so I was very, very guilty of saying like, okay, he recommends 200 micrograms of selenium every day. I'm going to take 4 and see what happens. Well, turns out there's selenium toxicity too. There's
spoiler alert.
Yeah, exactly. Or, bulletproof coffee is a perfect example. 1 cup of bulletproof coffee has helped a lot of people achieve, nutritional ketosis. It's also helped a lot of people shed some weight. So why not drink a liter of bulletproof coffee every day, right?
Yeah, always better.
I was always sort of the more is better type.
Yeah.
But with tests, what it does is allow you to put a filter on the world. We're inundated with information every single day. That can come from this podcast. That could come from, there's a gazillion podcasts out there now. That could come from blogs. That could come from really, really bad articles in USA Today, that kind of stuff, right? And if you have a simple set of tests that allow you to tell, hey, this is needed for me, this is not needed for me, and that could be as easy as metabolomics, gut testing, and in certain cases, hormones are warranted. But it allows you to put a filter on the world. And the filter allows you to not go insane, because when it comes to health, in this health space, you're going to hear things like urine therapy are good for you. You're going to hear things like I should stick this red light up my butt. You're going to hear things like I should take 5,000 calories a day and ignore calories in, calories out, because it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Now, in certain cases, all of those things may be true. Urine therapy, probably not, but it's, how do I produce a filter so that I know what's relevant to me? And those benchmarks help that. Metabolomics, gut immune system testing, hormone testing, certain cases, food sensitivity testing. Those are my sort of base frameworks. You can spend a lot of money on testing, and I have, but just getting some sort of basic framework will help you out a bit. Then let's go into the immediate needs, because when you have that basic framework of testing, you're going to engage in something called nutrient and hormone balancing, especially if you work with a practitioner. We train a lot of them. So if you're interested in meeting one, just Thomas has my contact information, get in touch with him. We'll get you a practitioner. But if you want to do nutrient hormone balancing in the most diligent of people, and if you're listening to this, chances are you're not going to hit it 100% of the time. I have clients that are very, very diligent. I am very diligent myself, and I don't hit it 100% of the time, but it'll take 6 to 9 months to take effect. But if you're going with something that um, you have some sort of existing issue that you want resolved right now, whether that be brain fog, whether that be you can't focus because Kylie Jenner's all over TikTok and you like Kylie Jenner, or you can't sleep, which is a very common one where we started this conversation. You need something that could solve it today. And actually, this is how Troscriptions got started. It's Friday, so I'm wearing teal. That's our Troscriptions color. And let's talk particularly about the relaxation, because what I want more people to recognize is that the off switch leads to a greater on switch. It's more of a leverage factor rather than decreasing your productivity. And so when you get the off switch, and let's say you can't sleep, you can't stress, or sorry, you can't be resilient because you're stressed out all the time, what are the factors that can help you today? Well, this requires a little bit of knowledge around neurotransmitters, how your body works, etc. And neurotransmitter testing is shit. Like, you cannot get good neurotransmitter testing. The Braverman test is okay, but urinary neurotransmitter testing is testing stuff in your gut. And so you have to work with a practitioner, clinically correlate, what neurotransmitters you may need. And so what does that look like? A practitioner is asking you questions like, hey, are you sleeping well? There's something called the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, which is worth looking into for those of you who aren't sleeping well. It's free, available online. You can get an Oura Ring, you can get a Whoop, or you can just acknowledge to yourself that you're stressed. And most business owners are. So if you're stressed and you don't want to wait 6 to 9 months, or you are just starting on your meditation journey and you know that it's going to take time, what can you do right now? Well, there's certainly a lot of pharmaceuticals for that, but let's say pharmaceuticals don't resonate with you. Again, nothing against pharmaceuticals here, but want a certain set of tools for you to be able to relax now. And so Troscriptions, what we did was we created those point in time solutions. Those point in time solutions are not meant for you to take your entire life. It's more meant for you to take until that nutrient and hormone balancing takes into effect. So whether it's stress or sleep or something involving relaxation, it involves a neurotransmitter that I mentioned earlier called GABA. So gamma aminobutyric acid. GABA is synthesized from glutamate. And so glutamate is your body's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. Now, everybody listening to this is probably like, hey, I've seen GABA supplements. I've taken GABA supplements. The problem with GABA supplements is that if you take them, the molecule GABA itself is too large to cross the blood-brain barrier. That means that it's likely not working. Or if it's working for you, you have something called a leaky gut or a leaky brain. We need a form of GABA that crosses the blood-brain barrier and that helps release more GABA in the brain. It's called a GABA agonist. And there's only a certain types of molecules that actually cross the blood-brain barrier. In TroCalm, which is our anti-anxiousness formula or anti-stress formula, that GABA agonist is called B3 GABA. So what we did was we found a form of GABA attached to niacin that actually helps launch it up into the brain, past the blood-brain barrier, and it helps release GABA where you need it most in your brain. Because most people who have issues with sleep, with stress, it's because they have ruminating thoughts, right? Let me let you in on a little secret. We almost called TroCalm TroZen because it allows your thought patterns to actually, calm down just a little bit. So you bind a GABA agonist to the GABA receptor and it releases GABA. But the beauty of TroCalm or anything that we do in regards to GABA is that it also contains something called a positive allosteric modulator of the GABA receptor. So think of that as something that is a multiplier effect for GABA taking effect in your brain. So GABA agonist plus positive allosteric modulator, 1 + 1 = 3 in this case. And so whether that's Trocalm, where the positive allosteric modulator is kava kava. I know you're in Indonesia right now, and kava kava is probably served at every bar in Seminyak. I hope, at least, maybe not Seminyak, but Ubud at least.
Definitely
Uh,
Ubud, yeah.
and so you have access to these positive allosteric modulators. It's also kava kava in particular. My wife she was born in Korea but grew up in New Zealand, and it's a drink that's been used in the Pacific Islands for years, both as a celebratory drink for, sorry, centuries, not years. It's both as a celebratory drink for weddings, for war, before wars, which is interesting because you relax from it. It's an anxiolytic, but we use kava kava as that positive allosteric modulator. Kava by itself can be effective, but it's much more effective in combination with that GABA agonist. So those two together, 1+1 = 3. Now let's transition from stress to sleep, because sleep, I mean, I'm sitting here in the United States, and there was this lovely survey about how the average American gets less than 6 hours of sleep a night. Rewind to the beginning of this podcast if you weren't listening, but we talked a little bit about the effects of that on brainwaves. Sleep, one of the main prescriptions right now is something called Zolpidem. Zolpidem also goes by the brand name Ambien. And one of the side effects of Zolpidem is that it kind of can wreck your REM sleep. Now, in the case of sleep, this GABA agonist plus positive allosteric modulator combination actually has a similar result in the sense that it can help you relax. Now, we switched up those molecules because sometimes people need variety, but also you want something that helps you feel sleepy. And so in the case of Tro-Z, the positive allosteric modulator is Hanakyle, which is derived from magnolia bark. And then the coolest GABA agonist on the planet, at least the one that I found so far, is something called Agarin. And I'm going to spend a moment telling a story of Santa Claus, if it's okay, because this is where Santa Claus, flying reindeer, and all this fun stuff happen.
His mushrooms.
So Agarin is one of two active molecules that we know of from a mushroom called Amanita muscaria. For those of you who aren't familiar with Amanita, you can throw it into Google right now, or Perplexity, or whatever your tool is. It's a mushroom with red and white spots. It's also the mushroom that Toad from Mario Kart was modeled after.
Yeah, Alice in Wonderland, I think.
Alice in Wonderland. But let's go into Amanita a bit. So the story behind Amanita is that when it's either Finland or Russia, depending on who you ask, because the two countries don't really get along. There's shamans in Finland or Russia. They chew the Amanita, they eat the Amanita, they swallow, and then they urinate into a bowl. Their disciples then drink the liquid urine. This is maybe the only case where urine therapy is actually, welcome. But as a result of that, they get high. Now, the reason for that is likely due to the other molecule, not Agarin, that's ibotenic acid. We don't have ibotenic acid in our sleep formulation. Why? Well, one, it might get you high. Two, it's neurotoxic. And so when we isolated Agarin, also known as muscimol, we wanted it because, one, in a micro amount, so 1 milligram is what you get with turkey, it can be incredibly effective as a GABA agonist. It's a 1 to 4 hour half-life, depending on your metabolism. And what I love about it, and I take Tro-Z every single night, and the reason why I do it is because for the business owners out here, there's usually people who have issues with sleep onset, and Tro-Z addresses that, or sleep maintenance, meaning you wake up in the middle of the night and you just start going because you got a Slack message and your cortisol is spiking when it shouldn't. Muscimol or Agarin, because it's a 1 to 4 hour half-life, tends to keep those thoughts at bay much more for me when I wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. And so whereas before I would say, 1 to 2 nights a week, I would wake up and, it's just, okay, it's 3 a.m. I might as well just get going because my brain's already working. Now it's like, okay, I get up, go to the bathroom. I wake up, 6, 7. I usually tend to be on the earlier side, so 6-ish, and I'm ready to go. So I've now got all the benefits of getting more deep sleep, getting more REM sleep, et cetera, increasing sleep duration. And that is a result of that GABA agonist plus positive allosteric modulator. Just to go through TROZ here for a second, because it's our most complex formula and it's really freaking cool.
Yeah.
We address all aspects of sleep architecture. So onset, we include adenosine. Adenosine helps with sleep promotion. We include cordycepin, which is a partial adenosine agonist. We include melatonin. We include 5-HTP. Let me actually go into cordycepin for a second because it's also introimmune. But cordycepin promotes deep sleep. It actually helps ATP production. So cordycepin is different from cordyceps mushroom. Cordycepin is an active alkaloid in cordyceps mushroom. And it's actually, I think it's either 0.5% or 2% of the average cordyceps mushroom. We isolated the active because we wanted it. It has a lot of interesting benefits to the immune system, and put it in there in a dose that is scientifically proven to promote deep sleep. So we have cordyceps in there. Then to stay asleep, we have that GABA agonist plus positive allosteric modulator. That's the muscimol / agarin plus the honokyle. And then we have the 5-HTP releasing serotonin, downstream effects on melatonin, right? And that allows you to stay asleep. We also have CBD and CBN in there. Those are two non-THC cannabinoids. We do not do anything with THC. And I have tests that say 0.0%. We don't even mess with the 0.3 because we do have some government officials that take it and they cannot have anything show up on a drug test, right? So TROZ allows you to wake up feeling refreshed, and it actually promotes what I was just talking about earlier and what you were talking about earlier when it comes to that parasympathetic state, that relaxed state of waking up. And so when you wake up and all of a sudden you're not tempted necessarily, or at least you're aware that you're tempted to grab your cell phone, well, maybe you go and grab a meditation instead, or maybe you decide to listen to an audiobook for an hour to gain that knowledge, to work on that infinite game rather than that finite game, and to really just start your day with that state of equanimity. And that's one of the things that I love most about TROZ. Most of the people that take it really just want to sleep, right? And so they get the benefits of sleeping. I tend to focus on how I wake up on the next day. But again, it's a really interesting combination that we solely got into because we're looking to solve those point in time health problems that you have while you're also doing the really hard work of doing the behavior change, the meditations, the syncing your chronobiology, getting your supplements right, etc.
I love that. I think that's a lovely, I said, parallel with, I said, we talked about this in our last episode, that your whole framework when it comes to business in general, that yin and yang, short term, long term, and addressing the root in parallel. Again, putting my marketing hat on, comparison I give is, when I'm building lead generation systems for medical professionals, it's like starting a fire. You need that initial kindling, which in marketing language would be, paid ads or whatever, social media ads or Google ads. And while that slow burn or that big log is burning, which is usually, organic traffic through Google or increasing lifetime value through email marketing and so on. Similarly with this, I love the fact that you're saying, okay, meditation, lifestyle changes, it does take time for habits to be formed and so on. So let's just immediately help you work sober effectively by getting your sleep in, and until that kind of kicks in. I'm conscious of the time, but one thing I'd love to dive into quickly here is, and this is a good reminder for me, the importance, I suppose. I'd love to understand more about the physiology of why effectively turning off acts as a force multiplier for when you are turned on. Why is it that productive rest, so to speak, I'm not even talking about sleep here, your days off work, why is it that you come back so much more creative, so much more motivated, so much more inspired? Naval Ravikant often talks about the career of a information worker of some sort is less like that of a marathon or a sprinter. It's a marathon of sprints. It's like a lion hunting a gazelle. Moments of intense inspiration followed by productive rest. Could you speak to the physiology behind that?
Sure. I mean, at least I'll give a stab at it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So,
yeah. Better than me.
we'll kind of go through a few examples here because I have the benefit of seeing both entrepreneurs, but also highly creative people. I live with one, and I also work with a few musicians, right, and actors and those types, right? So let me try and figure out how we're going to break this apart. But let's talk about first like the far side of the continuum, the creative, if you will, where their output, their benefit, their utility to society is something. The case example of this is like an artist, right? Where it's almost impossible to be creative all the time. And sometimes, if you are that way, that borderlines in insanity. And there's a few high profile examples of that throughout history. But if you, and you can take examples of people like Basquiat as an artist, where, where you try to push the creativity all the time and look what happened to him. But with celebrity in particular, and with a creative like a musician, there's ebbs and flows in that creativity. You're going to have divine inspiration or whatever you call it in certain times, and oftentimes it's not predictable. And so there's a work rest ratio there that needs to be acknowledged and promoted and fed. And in case of celebrity, oftentimes what's often negated is the low grade stress of being a celebrity. And so the ability to go outside, if you're, somebody with the last name Kardashian, and just go out and have a coffee is actually quite hard, right? You have to put on all the glitz and glamour because you are who you are. And so there's a frequent need to take breaks. And it's probably more frequent than people realize. We've worked with a few people that are kind of A-list celebrities, musicians, that types of thing. And it seems to be that a minimum of a once a quarter, 1 week break, if not once a month, 1 week break is needed to get refreshed and to be able to hit those creative juices again. Now, let's get more into the entrepreneur, practitioner, business owner type, which is uh, a bit more from my background. And there's certain components of this that need to be acknowledged. So when you don't sleep, your brain is obviously not operating as well. You can again refer to the study that we alluded to at the beginning of this, um, the beginning of this conversation. When you do sleep, you have things like memory consolidation happening. You have hormones building and optimizing. You have recovery. You have benefits in the immune system, or you have a repair of your immune system. Simply put, your brain, and let's get a little bit into that physiology, needs time to recover too. Now, this actually was discovered, I believe, by Jeffrey Illith more than a decade ago now, in something called the glymphatic system. And so everybody here knows the lymphatic system. It's a series of vessels that exist all over your body that help you remove waste products. But your brain has its own lymphatic system. It's called the glymphatic system. Now, when you're asleep is the only time that we know of, at least in my most recent reading of this research, it may have changed, that the glymphatic system is activated. And what happens there is essentially cerebral spinal fluid goes up into your brain, clears out byproducts like adenosine, beta amyloid, some of those plaques that may or may not contribute to neurodegenerative diseases, et cetera. But when you're asleep, that's when it's active. So if you're not sleeping, you're likely building up some of these waste products. Now, in the case of adenosine, it just makes you feel tired. Caffeine is probably the world's most used nootropic, right? And the reason why is because it's an adenosine receptor antagonist. It blocks adenosine, helps you feel awake. So physiologically, your brain is not operating at 100% if you're not getting sleep. Now, let's go into the marathon versus a series of sprints. I believe Naval First, Naval's a very smart guy and incredibly articulate, far more articulate than me. But it's when you start talking about sprints, there's sort of this sprint, rest, sprint mentality. There should be a sprint, rest, sprint mentality among entrepreneurs. And I'm guilty of this, right? Like I
Yeah.
sometimes think I could do the marathons, and everything has a cost. We all go back to our first conversation around yin and yang. There's a dynamic balance that you're consistently trying to achieve. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. But that sprint, rest, sprint, and acknowledging a work rest ratio is one of the better ways to make sure that you're able to perform well. We've touched on today the benefits of sleep, the benefits of syncing your circadian rhythms, because you have a whole lot of machinery that operates within you that you don't even know is operating. Like, I don't know about you, Thomas, but right now I can't tell if my cells are dividing or if they're going through apoptosis. Like, I don't get a flash into my brain whether or not that's happening. And so to sync our circadian rhythms allows our body to operate its machinery without too much conscious thought. And so if there's conscious thought there, that's usually because there's been some misalignment, or you've injured yourself, or you don't eat well, or you're eating all the time because it's constantly summer all around the world when it comes to food, and you can get every food that you want, right? So there's that sprint, stop, sprint metaphor. And one of the things that, is helpful in a stop is not to work at 50%, because, in weightlifting, there's something called the deload week, where you give yourself a break and you go down to 50% of, or, whatever percent of your maximum maximum weights. And that can be useful. But, and with weightlifting, there's the consistent discipline, right? That helps in achieving greater gains over time. In work, when you go down to 50%, you're still engaging your brain. So your brain's still going to be engaged. So that work rest ratio, it's oftentimes helpful for people to find something like a hobby, or, go on a date or have dinner out with friends. This is where social relationships certainly are very, very helpful. To give a change in mind, a change in reference, and allow for serendipitous thought to appear. And so for me and for my wife, it appears that, spending a lot of time in the art world is very, very helpful for enhancing my creative brain, because the reason, and I'm not what would be classically called a creative. I don't, if you had me paint something, I'm not sure I would be able to call it art. Let's put it that way. And so, when you switch your frame of reference and allow for those moments for serendipitous thought to occur, that's really when you can get creative and be able to solve those problems. Because frankly, as a business owner, your job title is actually creative problem solver.
It's a good wrapping up. I'm conscious of the time here, so we'll have to. I mean, listen, we go. Sure, listen, there's going to have more of these conversations, but I think great way around that up. Doing something that gets you in flow state outside of work.
Yeah,
we hear about is
hobbies work, checking out art museums, going for a walk outside, just looking at, there's a prescription now in Japan and in Scotland, I believe, in certain, I can't remember what area of Scotland, to go into nature. And the Japanese call it Shinrin Ryokyu. And I apologize for any Japanese people listening. My Japanese is awful. It's worse than my Korean. And it's just simply going out into nature, and there is proven reduction in cortisol there. So maybe it's not a cortisol issue for everybody, but just changing your frame of reference, getting a hobby, going into, various places, and, seeing a different way. Not only does it help you allow for serendipitous thought, but also in more complex societies, more complex systems, orthogonal thinking helps. And so orthogonal thinking is drawing inspiration from other fields for your own. And frankly, that's a lot of what I do.
It's a great rational argument for that. Listen, with that, I'm conscious you've a hard cut off, Boom, but honestly, love this. I feel like we'll definitely have to a few more. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, whenever you want, Thomas. So I
Yeah.
really enjoy the podcast. I really enjoy what you're doing. For all the clinicians listening to this, keep on doing what you're doing. I'm basically now, at least at this point in my life, supporting, uh, clinic supporting clinics in the sense that with our nonprofit, we have a framework for teaching people, but also I spend a lot of time talking to practitioners because you're out there helping people in the world. You're out there helping, 100, 200, 300 people. If there's ways that we can help you, if there's things that you want us to talk about in this podcast that you found interesting a little bit more, please reach out to Thomas. Thomas, it's always been a pleasure.
As always, until next time. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Excellent.